I see. Good. All right. Well, back to this. Now, I want you to know I don't do this on purpose. For some reason, after a whole year of your custom of recording things, my brain, it's like your grandfather. It's like your grandfather, Jason. I'm just not accustomed to pushing that damned button. Uh, um, So this is a case, not exactly about a commentary, but it's Hamevi Yavi, the reader who delves into this book and reads this and still thinks that there's something missing because God's not mentioned here, really doesn't know what's going on. And I was listening to a lecture, not a lecture, I guess I was reading something, a little poor message from the president of Yeshiva University. And there's a little too, it was a little too simplistic, but then I might not have been his intended audience. But he was talking about how, Hashem this and Hashem that, and and the Jews are always going to be protected. The Jews were protected in this story, and so on. But in this story, because you know the ending of the story, you know what's going to happen at the confrontation. The um, the divine interference, I guess, isn't as obvious. Let's talk about that when it comes, because that's interesting in itself. You keep silent. First, there are a couple of things. If you keep silence, we're going to be delivered anyway, my dear daughter, my dear adoptive daughter, and if that happens, then you are in big trouble. And who knows? In any event, maybe God set this whole thing up back to the beginning when Achashverosh expelled Vashti, that all these sets of circumstances are going to come to this exact moment. God knew what God was doing, and you're there for this purpose. A, if you don't do it, it's going to happen anyway. And B, maybe this is your job, and now we know why you went through all of this. Sandy, your hand is still up, I see.
Yeah, I want to know, it says, while you and your house, wait a minute, it says, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter. Is that referring to God? I mean, what is it referring to? And then it says, but you're going to die anyway.
Now, he doesn't say you would die anyway, but if relief comes from, I'll answer your question as best I can in a second. What I think is saying is, if you don't do your job here, Esther, bad things are going to happen to you and your whole family. So do your job. And in any event, who knows if this isn't the reason you're here anyway. I mean, I think I want to open this up for a little bit of a discussion, but yeah, it's not that the way I'm reading it is Mordechai, the author, through Mordechai, is saying God acts in history. In particular, God acts in history for the sake of the Jews. And if one human physical means for effectuating that redemption goes awry for some reason or another, the human being tasked with that act of implementing that act of redemption doesn't do his or her job, God's going to find somebody else. Maybe Hatach will do it, but you may as well do it because you ought to do it, and you may as well do it because Lord knows. Well, it doesn't say Lord. You might you may have been here for that purpose. Now, so before we go on, I mean this is a subject that's alluded to in biblical literature and dealt with to some degree in the medieval Jewish philosophical literature. Maimonides deals with it, Crescus deals with it, Gersonides deals with it, that and others as well, more minor figures. And Maimonides has this thesis of hashgacha pratit, that is to say, individual providence, and hashgacha klalit, which is a kind of a general hashgacha, general providence over the world, that God takes care of the world, and that the world functions because of God, which is one of the reasons why on Friday night, probably it's gotten irritating at this point. When we do the Ma'ariv Aravim prayer, I stop and explain how the author of that prayer and its placement in the Siddur at that point is talking about, it's actually talking about Hashgacha Klalit. It's talking about general providence, the way that God governs the universe. Um, so I'm asking, what I'm asking, if there's any, and see if there's any conversation about this. Does this idea, particularly of individual providence, does that resonate with you at all as a fact of our existence as a human being, as a Jew, or is it past its prime? Yeah, Christine.
I think it's relevant, but because if you can do something, you should do it. And if you don't do it, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe something will happen to save, maybe somebody else will step up, whatever. But what he's reminding her is that she is, part of the group that is going to be exterminated. And her position and all the things that she would be protecting by not doing it are irrelevant.
Okay, that's interpreting the story. My question is, do you believe in divine providence? That's the question. Maybe I didn't ask it clearly enough.
Yeah, and then, well, for me, not so much, but yeah, I don't really believe it.
We've got two hands raised. Wendy, I think you were up first, and then Harry.
So by divine providence, you mean things happen for a reason? Is that what you're referring to? Or God set things in motion on purpose kind of thing?
No, well, more than that. God will save you if you God will take care of God takes care of you.
I think that's more spiritually. I don't think you can count on that in actions in the regular world. I mean, sometimes people get saved by circumstances that seem odd or seem impossible. But really, when God takes care of the people, it's really saying, that your integrity, your being is being taken care of, not necessarily the body and the materiality of who you are.
Yeah. Um, Actually, I let you go by, Harry. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. It's problematic. I mean, the implication is it's preordained that God is going to take care of the Jews, whether or not we accept our personal responsibility. Whether if Esther doesn't step up and do her job, then she's going to face some consequences. But the Jewish people are going to be saved anyway.
You okay?
That's what this implies, which is problematic. But if everyone assumes that, then other than the threat of personal accountability directly, nobody has to step up.
Okay, I'm not sure that's the. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I'm reflecting on literature that you haven't read. I'm not sure that's entirely what the concept means, and of course there are different interpretations of it. My favorite interpretation, which is going to muddy the waters, is Maimonides, who says he's not interested in this blanket protection by God of the Jewish people, regardless of the individual. Maimonides has this intellectual notion that, based on medieval epistemology, that individuals are able to acquire ideas in an intellectual sense. The more you learn, the more you know. This is actually kind of what Christine was saying. And the more you know, the more you're able to navigate the world without without endangering yourself. So you know about health, you take care of yourself. You know that there's a tiger loose outside the city. You don't go outside the city. Um, and the more you know, the greater your connection to God. God is a very abstract thing in Maimonides, in the medieval idea. But I want to get back to the question anyway, not the Maimonidean version. I mean, this guy, the president of Yeshiva University, so you know he's an educated guy. There's no doubt about it. And in his little Devar Torah for Purim, he cites this passage and he says, you know, something like, we don't know how this war is going to end, but we know it's going to end, and we know we're going to be victorious, and we're going to know we're going to move on to a glorious future. And that's a faith statement in Hashgacha Pratit, in divine providence. So it's not like the idea is not out there among, you know, educated Jewish people. So I thought I'd raise it and see if there's any more response. If not, we'll go on. We'll go on with the story. But it's not something we liberal men and women think about so much. And if we did, I don't know where we would fall on the matter, but it's just not a question that liberal Jews tend to dwell on, unless you study medieval philosophy. So, anything else on this matter? Because now divine providence is about to be effectuated. Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. So what's packed in that? What is she saying? What is she saying, and what is she hoping for, if not actually expecting? This is Hashgacha Pratit.
Mhm.
So, somebody tell me what this verse is saying.
She's saying she's going to go do what Mordecai told her to do, regardless of the consequences.
Not exactly. That's true, but what precedes it?
Well, she asked the Jews to pray for her and to, you know, fast on her behalf to kind of like get God's support for what she's going to do next.
That's right. That's the Hashgacha Pratit part. We're gonna, Christine, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, but she's also preparing herself by doing it herself. Not only
Yes,
that, but
yes.
she's also preparing herself for death,
All right. So, on the possibility that it doesn't
that
work.
she might get killed. Yeah.
But packed in all of this is a faith statement.
Yeah.
Fasting, righteous fasting. Let me put it that way. Righteous fasting can change can get God's attention. You know, just like at the beginning of the book of Exodus, where God suddenly wakes up and sees the Israelites are enslaved. Says, "Oh yeah, I got to go do something about this." I mean, here it's the same sort of thing. This can get God's attention, and God will, in God's inimitable way, make certain that when Esther approaches the king, he's inclined to admit her into the court rather than have her killed. And then things happen that are Esther centered. And this is what we're about to see is the great part of Esther's character. Yes, Wendy.
We see this same idea of fasting to change God's mind in the story of Jonah and the big fish, where he goes to Nineveh and he says, you're going to be destroyed. So they all wear sackcloth and ashes and they pray, and then God changes his mind. So it's something we've seen before.
Yeah, the difference there, it's the right, I mean, it's the right connection. The difference there is that the sackcloth and ashes and fasting is also connected with tshuva. They don't just, well, exactly, I guess, was it Christine?
Well,
Whoever said, you know, Esther's participating in the fast, there's not only just fasting involved, but there's an intentionality involved as well. Had the Ninevites only fasted without intentionality, they probably would have been wiped out. I mean, I don't, it's an alternate history. Did I see a hand?
no.
So But and if I'm to perish, I'm to perish. But there's a lot going on in this verse. I'm going to do it. You got to do it. And in so doing this, not only is this fasting happening on the possibility, on the hope that we'll get God to intervene and change the decree, but Esther, who we don't know how long has been in the palace now as queen, is reconnecting with her people. That's another piece of it. She's reconnecting with her people via the request for fasting and her participating in that same act. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded. On the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood at the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room facing the entrance of the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter which had been in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be granted you. So either now we rationalists can say, in the context of the story, either the king would have done that, regardless of all the fasting, or the fasting had some impact on the personality of the king. But given the structure here, I think the reader is supposed to believe that the fasting had the impact, that perhaps she would have been banished or killed had she approached without the communal response to the crisis. And then there's the whole thing about the golden sea. Yeah. What?
No, I'm sorry, the dogs are acting up.
Oh, goodbye. Sorry, I forgot Betsy's part of the wedding party tomorrow. She's having her nails done with all with select invitees. I forgot that. All right, so I lost my train of thought here. I mean, I guess, the golden scepter as a phallic symbol seems pretty clear. And she's got to touch the golden scepter and all of that, but we don't need to get too deeply into that. We can do that another time. Freud in the Bible. We'll have a little course called Freud in the Bible. But not only does he invite her in, of course, there are two things here that I note. One, why he could say to her, "How you doing? What's new? What's new, my wife?" He says, "What troubles you?" And so maybe it's reflective of some expression on her face or her body language, that he, who does not seem to be a terribly sensitive guy up until this point, maybe is sensitive enough to read in her that there's something on her mind. Or maybe it's just how he greets people who come unexpectedly. Christine.
Or having told everybody that they're going to die if he doesn't summon them, that somebody coming there and standing there might be an indication that something is very, very important.
Yeah. So the king commanded. I skipped a line here. Sorry. If it please her, so what does she do? She doesn't say it's on my mind, blah blah blah. She says she invites him to dinner. If it please your Majesty, Esther replied, "Did your Majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him?" The king commanded, "Tell Haman to hurry and do Esther's bidding." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, the king asked Esther for the second time, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be fulfilled." So the king seems to know, the author is telling us that the king seems to know that there's some, purpose. There's some subtext to what Esther's doing. It's not just a nice dinner with him and Haman. "My wish," replied Esther, "my request," and then this is good literary fashion, rather than diving right into it. "If your Majesty will do me the favor, if it please your Majesty, to grant my wish and accede to my request, let your and note the duplication in the language here. This is the author presenting what the author thinks, how the author thinks one talks to a king, right? Do me the favor, please, your majesty. Grant my wish, accede to my request. Let your majesty, and what is it? Come to another dinner tomorrow night. Come to the feast which I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do your majesty's bidding. So she's stretching it out. Literarily, this is kind of creating a tension for the reader, and I guess a tension for the king, and Haman just seems to be going along for the ride. You know, Haman the narcissist is just enjoying the hell out of the fact that he's been part of these royal parties of three people, of which he is a part. So that day Haman went out happy and lighthearted. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the palace gate, and Mordecai did not rise or even stir on his account, Haman was filled with rage at him. All right, so what's that telling us about Haman? He's just been invited to a second meal. The whole world is going his way. And yet he sees Mordecai, and his dark obsession rises again. Somebody out there's got some psychology background. What does that tell us about this guy?
Aside from being a narcissist, you mean? That if he's there, you know, he's demanding control and obedience at all times, even when he's excited and happy. That his position is everything to him. Not unlike
And
somebody we know today.
Doesn't
he's a
have great-
consummate anti-Semite. He's a consummate anti-Semite right there.
A consummate anti-Semite.
He also doesn't have any ego strength. It's all based on, as you already indicated, narcissism.
You got no so I mean everything's going his way, but he sees more, and including that he's got a decree to murder Mordecai and his people, and still he sees Mordecai, and all of that bile comes up into his mouth, and his mood is darkened again, filled with rage at him. Let's see, Mimolei Hamana Mordecai Chema. Nevertheless, Haman controlled himself and he went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. So Zeresh becomes, let's see, Esther, Mordecai, Ahasuerus, Haman, Vashti. She becomes like the sixth major character in the story. She has a role. And Haman told them about the great wealth and his many sons, and all about how the king promoted him and advanced him above the officials at the king's courtiers. Now, this is old news. Like, this didn't happen like that morning. He's gathering all about, and he's telling the story again about how he got elevated. What's more, said Haman, Queen Esther gave a feast, and besides the king, she did not have anyone but me. Anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her along with the king. So how wonderful am I? Yet all this means nothing to me every time I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the palace gate.
You know,
So Zeresh has a good
I don't know
idea.
if it's the right parallel, but I'm reminded of the attitude I see in a lot of people in our country today that are very well off and have nothing to complain about. But if they find out that some students got their debt forgiven, they get into a rage and they just can't stand that something good happened to somebody else that had no impact on them, you know, or somebody gets some rights that they would prefer not to have, and it has no impact on their own lives and rights, but boy, they get furious and start into outrage. There seems to be something in the human condition that puts people in this position, and I don't know what it is about being comfortable and happy that makes people need a reason to get angry, but it sure seems to happen a lot.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I agree, Jason. I just wouldn't extend it as far as the human condition. I think it's historically shaped. That the notion that anybody else's benefit is a deprivation for you is something which is really quite specific to this kind of society. So,
Okay. So Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a stake be put up 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go gaily with the king to the feast. The
Nice.
proposal pleased Haman, and he had a stake put up. Now, those of you who know your cubits, how high is this stake?
But it's 150 feet. The cubit is the length between your elbow and your palm. That's a cubit.
Yeah, I think not quite. I'm gonna do the
Okay.
math.
So,
Uh,
but it's basically a what, a foot and a half?
Yeah,
Something
a foot
like
and a
that.
half. So that's seven. What did you say?
I said at first 3 feet, but then I looked at it and I thought,
I
no,
think it's
that's a foot
70.
and a half.
I think it's approximately 75 feet, which is
Yeah.
tall enough. That's a pretty high. I mean, you impale somebody 75 feet off the ground in a society where you don't have big high city buildings, and it's a sign. It's
Yeah, you need a 76-foot ladder to get up
I
there.
was gonna say, how are they gonna get him up there?
Right.
Talk about divine providence.
That's one of those suspending disbelief issues. So it's all set up. Tomorrow he's gonna be impaled. Haman's gonna go to dinner, and the next day or whenever it is, the Jews are gonna be exterminated. All things are going in this guy's direction. However, and this starts off appearing like a sidebar, but it's key to the story. And in fact, the earlier element in the story that leads to this seemed irrelevant, but now, as good writer, the author brings it forward. So that night, sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought, and it was read to the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigtana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had plotted to do away with Achashverosh. And you remember this from before. And the king says, "What honor or advancement has been conferred upon Mordecai for this?" the king inquired. "Nothing at all has been done for him," replied the king's servants who were in attendance on him. Ha! Who was in the court? So I guess this is the middle, and this is a little strange, the kind of geography of this, because last time we saw Haman, just in the last chapter, he's at the home with the mishpocha, and they're planning to put up a 75-foot stake. But now it's the middle of the night, and who was in the court? The king asked, for Haman had just entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on the stake that he had prepared for him. I guess Haman couldn't wait till the morning. So it is Haman standing in the court, the king's servants answered him. "Let him enter," said the king. Haman entered, and the king asked him, "What should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor?" Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king desire to honor more than moi?" So Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head the royal diadem has been set. Let the attire and the horse be put in charge of one of the king's noble courtiers, and let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square, while they proclaim before him, 'This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor.'" And Achashverosh scratches his cheek in his bed and says, "Quick then," said the king to Haman, "get the garb and the horse as you have said, and do this to Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Omit nothing of what you have proposed." So, if you look up the word irony in the Evans Shoshan Hebrew Dictionary, this is what you see. This is
Oops.
the most delicious elements of irony in literature.
Hmm.
And it shows either Achashverosh doesn't get the connection between Mordecai and Haman's decree to kill the Jews, or he doesn't care. There's a disconnect. And um, um, I had this little story is coming to mind. It's probably not so helpful, but back when I was in rabbinical school, um, I was asked by a woman to create a little service in honor of the fact that she was going to be planting a tree in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens in honor of her deceased father. And in talking to her, she starts talking about, her own psychology, her own mental health issues, and how she's been, so um, um, she's been so mistreated by her mother, who by her description sounded like an ogre, and she goes on and on and on about her mother, and she has to do this for her father, and she's afraid about how she's going to feel about her mother being at the ceremony. So I get to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens a little early because I wasn't exactly sure where we were meeting. I'm driving my car around the perimeter of the gardens, and I noticed this elderly, very short woman. And I park the car and I find the spot and I meet the woman in whose honor and for whom I'm helping to honor her father. And this short, wizened woman shows up. It's the mother. You could, a breeze could have knocked her over. And yet, in the mind of the daughter, this woman was a giant, an evil giant. And that's always stood in my mind as a prime example of obsession, right? The daughter had this obsessive, deeply psychological and this deeply psychological feeling about her mother that turned her into a monster, and probably was a monster to this woman. I have no doubt about that. So, but this is an example, kind of an example of that. The Haman's obsession with Mordecai is now being used to really, really hurt Haman. One can't imagine how distasteful, how disgusting this task is that's been imposed upon him by his own design, in a sense. He was the one who came up with the idea, right? But he's got to do it because the king says to do it. There's no way around it. He can't say to his servant, "You do it." He's got to do it. Because part of the gig is that Mordecai, or the person whom the king wants to honor, be taken around the city by a high-level courtier. So we all know how the story ends, but if we were reading this for the first time, the reader would begin to see that things are starting to go downhill very badly and very quickly for Haman. Yeah, Jason.
Not to get too in the weeds here, but if a royal courtier was supposed to parade the person around and Haman thought he was going to be on the horse, he wouldn't have paraded himself around. So there had to have been another royal courtier who could have done this job by definition. So he didn't have to be the one to do it himself, but he chose to do it for some reason. That's not because the king doesn't actually tell him that you have to do it.
No, he says, I believe he does. Get the garb and the horse, as you have said, and do this to Mordecai. That's
right, but do this just means parade him around as dressed and the horse. But Haman's proposal just said a royal courtier, so it could have just been another royal courtier.
Oh, okay. And my response when these kinds of things are reasonably brought up is, it wouldn't be the same story. And I would say it's hard to disobey a king's order. He could effectuate a bunion or twisted ankle, like suddenly got a cold, but then he couldn't show up for dinner that night. It seems pretty direct and hard to disobey. But you're right. He said, "Joe, you're just a little bit below me in the pecking order here. You do this." But then it would be a different story. So you can't, and it would ruin the story.
But also, he's so incredibly egocentric. It probably, he's thinking to himself, "Look, this guy is going to be impaled on a stake. Let me stretch this out and show that how innocent I am of this whole thing, that I'm following the king's orders and so on and so forth." But he's feeling inside, "Oh, this is delicious." You think you're being honored, but in fact, you're being set up. Nice.
Pay no attention to that 50-cubit stake over there.
Right.
Parade you around.
So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and paraded him through the city square. and he proclaimed before him, and you could just hear the joy in the voice, right? This is what he's saying is this is what is God damn, for the man and the king desires. And he's got to go around the city mumbling like that, and everybody sees Mordecai elevated. Now, of course, I guess the word here is an irony, but again, spoiler alert. But you all know how the story ends. This is also highly symbolic of what's actually going to happen, like within 12 hours, when Esther reveals who the enemy of the Jews is. Mordecai returned to the king's gate while Haman hurried home, his head covered in mourning. There Haman told his wife Zeresh all his friends everything that had befallen him. His advisors said to his wife Zeresh, his advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin. And that's a little bit. It's also a little bit of hashgacha pratit from their perspective. This is a bad sign. Things are not going well for you. Maybe the gods are involved. And while they were speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So I way overestimated the 12 hours. It's just a couple hours. And now he's not enjoying the wine feast so much. So the king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, it's a long feast, the king again asked Esther for the third time, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. And so now Queen Esther, who was 3 days ago, 4 days ago, let's say, was extraordinarily timid and did not want to intervene on behalf of her people out of fear. She's now in her element. Queen Esther replied, if your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted as my wish and my people as my request. So that's very clever, right?
Yeah, she's really
Save my
smart.
life. My life is in danger. And we see now that the king really likes this woman. Maybe he even loves this woman. And she says to him, my life is in danger, man. You got to help me. Christine, you going to say something?
No, I was just saying, the whole story shows her coming into her own intelligence and intelligence on behalf of her people.
And this is the point. This is the point for that. For we have been sold, my people and I. So, if there's any notion
Identifying.
that she had been feeling separate from her people, she now is expressing that she's part of this people. My people and I to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, if only it had been, if only we were to be enslaved, I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. I want to see if I can find that footnote. They're not so easy to find in this thing. There's a footnote.
About adversary?
Yeah, I don't know where to find it.
Oh.
Let me look at the Hebrew. Ki ein hatzar shoveh benezek hamelech. Hatzar. Yeah, it's a problematic word here, and I don't have an alternate translation. I apologize. I have a weekly study session with a friend of mine, and we're reading Jeremiah. And whenever we come to a problematic translation, he's got Robert Alter open.
The footnotes, by any chance, links when you click, like if you go over those A's?
Let's see. Oh, very good.
Little finger, yes.
There you go. Emendation yields a trifle, chisar, literally little finger. But that's not very helpful. That's not very helpful. How little finger comes to be adversary. Oh, I appreciate that. I didn't know that. Thereupon King Achashverosh demanded of Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he who dared to do this? The adversary, it's the same word, except it's paired with the word oyev, which is a clear word for for enemy. Tsar v'oyev Haman hara hazeh. The Hebrew is great. Vatomer Esther. Esther says, Ish tsar v'oyev Haman hara hazeh. And the diacritical marks tell you to pause after oyev. Vatomer Esther, pause. Ish tsar v'oyev, pause. Haman hara hazeh, pause. The Haman niv'at melifnei hamelech v'hamalka. The adversary and enemy, cried Esther, is this evil Haman. And Haman cringed in terror before the king and the queen. And the king in his fury left the wine feast for the palace garden, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life. For he saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. The king returned from the palace garden. So, hold on a second. All right, when the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, Haman was lying prostrate on the couch on which Esther reclined. So figure that as an image, right? He's cringing in fear, but on the same couch. So maybe his head is in her lap. And this does not create a positive image when the king sees it, right? Does he mean, cried the king, to ravish the queen in my own palace? No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Haman's face was covered. So I'm going to follow Jason's advice. Let's see. Now we don't get anything. The meaning of the Hebrew uncertain. Emendation yields blanched. And it gives an example in Psalms.
Like a pale as a mask, all the blood drained from his face.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, okay. So the gig is up. The jig is up, Haman, and it happens very suddenly in a very kind of even farcical way. But the king who agreed to murder the Jews, however many months ago, now knowing that that Esther is Jewish, is enraged. All the more enraged because in his fear, Haman lays down on the couch in fear, but happens to present the picture as if he's trying to rape Esther. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "What is more, a stake is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, the man whose very words saved the king. Impale him on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the stake which he had put up for Mordecai, and the king's fury abated. Rough Western justice is done, and the king's fury is abated. So that's a piece of it. So I'll stop and ask if there are any comments before we continue, because there's more to the story. Although this really is the big climactic moment. Yeah, Christine.
Yeah, well, it's still, no, never mind. I was just saying, usually if you're impaling somebody on a stake, you put them on the stake first and then erect the stake, but I don't know how they're getting this guy up there.
It's left to our imagination.
Yeah. Vlad the Impaler had a different way of doing it.
It's a pretty gory sight, a pretty gory image. Though things get a little gorier, and we're going to get to a point where some rabbis are unhappy with I think it has to be chapter 9. So let's see what happens here. The very day King Ahasuerus gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, Mordecai presented himself to the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. Oh, you're father and daughter, and you saved my life, and you're my beloved wife, what a treat. Maybe he kind of winks a little bit and says, how come, Esther, you waited all this time to tell me? I don't know, but that's one of these midrashim you might be. Did I suggest last week in some talking about this story this year around, I suggest a sequel or a continuation to this story as to how Esther has kids by King Ahasuerus and what happens then. But anyway, the king slipped off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman fortuitously before he had him impaled on a 50-cubit high stake, and gave it to Mordecai. So now Mordecai is the vice president and secretary of defense, all rolled into one. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's property. So things are now really swell for Esther and Mordecai. Esther spoke to the king again, falling at his feet and weeping and beseeching him to avert the evil plotted by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. So this situation, this turning of events, does not yet avert the decree against the Jews in the 127 provinces. No,
Can I ask a question?
hold on.
Is this is the first time we've heard Agagite?
No, it's the second time.
All right.
It's at the
Well,
very
I
beginning.
didn't read the first one.
Pardon me?
Is
Where
that
you
the
want-
same ethnicity as the king or not?
No, not at all.
Okay,
It's
so
I'm about
so
to tell you. I'm about to
what does
tell you.
that say? Yeah,
I'm about to tell you.
okay.
It's a reference to the Amalekites.
Ah,
We know right away at the beginning of the story. You weren't here last week.
okay,
Um,
you're right.
At the very beginning, when Haman is first identified, he's identified as the son of such and such, I think, the Agagite. And
Ah,
so now it's the second time he's been identified as an Agagite, a reminder that his background is from this people that is understood in biblical literature to be the consummate enemy of the Jews, the consummate enemy of the Jews. And so here, we can't ever really seem to can't get rid of Amalek. They can't get rid of him in the desert. King Saul does battle with the Amalekites, and he lets the animals and some women live, if I recall, and in order for this enemy to persist. So the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. Get up, he's saying, if you please your majesty, and if I have won your favor and the proposal seems right to your majesty, and if I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written, countermanding those that were written, which were written by Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, embodying his plot to annihilate the Jews throughout the king's provinces. And remember now, this is, I guess it's not really a leitmotif, but this is the third time in this story we've seen a description of the communications process in this society. First, when Vashti is banished. Second, when the decree against the Jews is decreed, and now to end the decree. So it reminds us. It reminds us, I guess, of a number of things. But but this I'm not sure I have much more to say about this. This is part of the structure of the story. For how can I bear to see the disaster which will befall my people, and how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, I have given Haman's property to Esther, and he has been impaled on the stake for scheming against the Jews. And you may further write with regard to the Jews as you see fit. Write it in the king's name, write it in my name, and seal it with my signet as an edict that has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet. And sealed with the king's signet may not. Did I miss something here? An edict, I beg your pardon, has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet may not be revoked. So the king's scribes were summoned at the time on the 23rd of the day of the third month, that is the month of Sivan. Letters were written in Mordecai's dictation to the Jews and to the satraps, the governors and the officials of the 127 provinces from India to Nubia, from India to Ethiopia, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. He had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Letters were dispatched by mounted courtiers riding steeds used in the king's service, bred of the royal stud. To this effect, the king has permitted the Jews from every city to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed force together with women and children, and plunder their possessions. Now note, when the first decree was written, and then when Esther addresses the king, she uses this language: my people they're getting ready to be destroyed, massacred, exterminated. And now the language is applied to the Jews' permission for self-defense. On a single day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. The text of the document was to be issued as a law in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples so that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The courtiers mounted on royal steeds went out in urgent haste at the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. Mordecai left the king's presence in royal robes of blue and white, with a magnificent crown of gold and a mantle of fine linen and purple wool. And the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. So everybody's happy about this. If you remember back in the beginning of the story, when the decree was declared and made public in Shushan, there was language to the effect that Shushan was, I think the word was confused. Mechubeh. I'm sorry, more Mevucha, sorry, Mevucha. I'm not going to go back and look at it, but there was some language to the effect that the residents of the city, and not just the Jews, were a little surprised at this. And so now the decree has been reversed, and Shushan, not just the Jews, Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness and happiness and honor. Yehudim hayata ora v'simcha v'sason vikar ken tihiyeh lanu kos yeshuot asa uv'shem Adonai ekra. Who remembers where that's from? This is one of those Maserati moments. Yehudim hayata ora v'simcha v'sason vikar ken tihiyeh lanu kos yeshuot asa uv'shem Adonai ekra. Lie, 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 right
After they cross the sea.
Havdalah. So the Havdalah authors lifted this right from here. The Jews had light and happiness and more happiness and honor. And in every province, in every city, when the king's command and decree arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. So there you have it. I'm going to read the first verse, and then I think we're going to call it a day, because like a lot of my colleagues, I'm not crazy about the slaughter that comes up in the story. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and the decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened, and the Jews got their enemies in their power. One more verse. Throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and no one could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. So what do you think? What do you think?
I think, well, this I've seemed to have struck out today, but I think that what's really interesting to me is is Zeresh and Esther as women who know, come into being women who know. And Zeresh ends up being like Cassandra, like nobody believes her, and or they ignore her words. And basically she's saying, hightail it out of here. You're gonna get killed. You're gonna get us all killed. And he's so full of himself that he ignores her. And Esther, she comes into an identity with her people in order to and then realizes that she's in a position to try to prevent all this from happening. And so she figures out a way that she won't be killed by Mordecai first.
Yeah, Ahasuerus, yeah. Yeah, and so I think, I probably said this at the beginning because I do all the time when I teach this story that there was a decade in rabbinical schools and maybe elsewhere where Vashti was seen as the real heroine of the story and not Esther. And Vashti is not to be ignored. I mean, that situation is very dramatic. But she doesn't get her way, right? I mean, she gets banished. Baruch Hashem, she's not killed. And it's kind of odd in a world where approaching the king uninvited can get you killed, and refusing to dance in front of a bunch of drunken men just gets her banished. But okay, but it's Esther's story. It's not Mordecai's story. It's not Vashti's story. This is the story of a woman who she's maybe you could argue this about Achashverosh, but I won't. She's the only character in the story who demonstrably undergoes a change. And it happens rather quickly and it happens rather effectively, both in terms of her demand that everybody fast, but that in the moment of the fasting, she's able to go before the king and confront Haman before the king. And it shows real courage. I can see, and probably there are feminist responses about, but what she had to do to become the queen, what she had to do with the king, which she didn't really want it, and there's something to that. But the story takes us. The story is about Esther and how she shows real courage, change in her character and courage. So anything else? And of course, every time I teach this story to adults, I'm not going to ask for your reaction, but I hope that you see the story very differently than maybe you have throughout your whole life, going to Purim spiels and Purim services, where the book is never seriously discussed. You read it quickly, you boo Haman, and you don't really see all the other very interesting things that go on to constitute what is, I think, a very good book. Any other comments?
I have one thought. This might sound a little odd. You talk about God's not mentioned in this, but in a sense, his spirit has taken over Esther. I mean, she made such a monumental change in her perception of the situation that it was almost like part of that plan. So she's acting like a seer in a sense, or a prophetess, where not, going from being the woman who, just doing what she needs to do to become queen to all of a sudden becoming, a very spiritual, open person and seeing what she really needs to do to save the Jews.
I like that a lot. She becomes a real leader. And keep in mind, that prophecy, Israelite prophecy, is not like Greek prophecy, right? Israelite prophecy is about essentially morality and adjuring people to do the right thing. And she's certainly not like Jeremiah in his way, but like Esther in her way. That's what she becomes. I mean, nobody's gonna. I've never seen her referred to as a prophet in the literature, but she does. I think it's a good point. She does acquire a kind of a prophetic role here, in her own way, and knows how to. And she knows how to talk to the king. I mean, in that kind of formal language. Jason.
I'll follow that comment because I think in many ways she has a parallel to Moses because Moses also is sort of an unlikely person to rise in. I mean, would not have necessarily been the one you would have thought would have come forward to be the leader. And when we talk about humility in the Jewish sense, they both practice it in the same way, which is that they initially don't feel as though they are the one who should be in this role, but they rise to the fullness of the occasion when called upon. And Esther does that very much, that when she realizes that it all depends on her, she lives up to the moment. And where others might have shrunk from it. And in that case, humility is not a debasement. It's humility is a richness of character in that Jewish sense, and she lives up to what is required of her to become the leader she has to be. And I think Moses does that in the same way too. And so it's, maybe it's just that we didn't call too many women prophets, but and what Deborah is one, right? But there's not many, right?
Yeah, I think Miriam is called a prophet at the Song of the Sea, and I think that's it. Now, this is a little sidebar, but before I do, I mean, your Musar education is showing. I mean, that's a very good Musarnik observation. Um, Maimonides has a whole in his he has this hierarchy of prophecy or prophets, starting with perhaps, if memory serves, Hagar, Abraham's concubine, and culminating with Moses, who was sui generis, and no other prophet like Moses. Um, um, and he brings into the class of prophets a whole lot more people than those that are specifically identified in the Bible. Um, and those of you who are really excited about studying Maimonides, and I know that's all of you, I'm happy to announce that there's a brand new translation of the Guide of the Perplexed coming out in May, translated by Len Goodman. And when I was at the Association for Jewish Studies in December, I attended a session, and the panel were all very complimentary about this new translation. So rush right out and spend $50 on this new translation when it comes out in May. I know I will, unless somebody buys it for me, because I need it on my shelf. Um, in the end, I have to say, although I'm pulled by Buber, less so by Rosenzweig, but a little by Rosenzweig, although Rosenzweig's a better philosopher than Buber. The Maimonidean worldview, adjusted for modern needs, modern intellectual needs, I think really has the greatest hold on me. A spiritual, rational philosopher, that really, that describes a worldview for me that I find helpful. Anyway, that's a little so you can help. I don't know who the publisher is, but you can help the publisher. I'm sure Len Goodman gets at least $3 royalty every time someone buys it. And so on. So any last thing about this book? I'm going to repeat it because I just think it's the same. Anytime you look closely at anything, a poem, a book, a bit of history, and maybe especially history, you look closely at any historical moment and you come to it uneducated, and you've got these ideas, and you look at the history, and you say, oh my God, it wasn't anything like that. And I think I'd like to think that you might walk away from the study of Esther that seeing that this was this is not just a kid's book, and it has interesting characters, ideas, pretty good dialogue, and so on. A little bit of psychology, not to mention the golden scepter. So any last words? There shall be no class next week. I did 2 weeks in a row, both because I wanted to do Megillat Esther, but there's no Sunday school next week, so Betsy and I are taking off for Vegas. You'll be happy to know that my mortgage is safely somewhere in Greensboro, North Carolina, so I'm not in danger of losing my house. We got
Where are you staying, Rabbi?
I forget. Betsy got the hotel, a fairly good hotel, nothing fantastic.
Okay, well, my 21-year-old serves drinks at the Cosmopolitan. Should you happen to be headed over there, I'll find out his schedule.
Yeah, do that. That would be fun. Let me know that.
And he also works at a pizza place down on the strip too, because one job is not enough possible
Ever.
hours. So I'll find
Yeah.
out what his schedule is.
Yeah, and we're going to see Cirque du Soleil, and Betsy wants to
Oh,
go to
wonderful.
parks. So just
Which one are you going to see?
There's a lot.
I know you got to talk to my wife. And she's she's
Rabbi,
always-
if you haven't watched the CNN thing on Vegas, it is really good. Talk about historical moments. You really get an historical lesson.
How do I find it?
It's a CNN. It's a special on when are they running it? Maybe Sunday nights.
Oh, I
Just
see.
go to CNN and they repeat it, or go to On Demand and look
Okay,
for the story
I'll
of
do that.
Vegas.
I'll definitely take a look at that. Definitely take a look.
Really good.
I mean, neither of us gambles. I'll go into a casino with a limit, and it may be a little more generous than normal, but no more than $100 because I don't know how to gamble. One more quick thing, and this is speaking of narcissism. This is just me being a narcissist. Once upon a time, I went to an Indian casino in Michigan with some congregants, and one of the congregants had a system. I mean, a printed up system of in blackjack. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. It doesn't guarantee that you win, and I don't think anybody won, but it guarantees that your 25 or $50 lasts a lot longer than you would have if you didn't know what to do. And I may dig up that system. It's available online.
You can actually buy it in a lot of casino gift shops. It's a perfect blackjack card. It tells you exactly what the odds most recommend on every potential situation. And I will tell you, blackjack is the game in the casino
It's
where
the
you
best
have
luck.
the
yeah.
best pure chance. If you just play straight blackjack, if you had to pick one thing to put $100 on in a casino, it would be just one straight up hand of blackjack. It's your best single play. That doesn't mean that you're going to win, but if you had to pick one, it's better than a play at any other game.
Well, it's also, but roulette, if you just bet black or red, it's 50-50.
That's it.
It's not
roulette.
50-50 because of
That's about it.
the two zero and double zeros.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's more than I know.
That's
Anyway,
roulette. That's
Yeah,
roulette.
but Jason
not
was working in the casino.
I worked for 7 years for a tribal casino. I
Okay.
had to
Oh.
learn the odds of everything.
But Jason, I thought the pass line and backing up your bet on craps was the best bet, better than blackjack.
For one single play,
Yeah.
This
I
is
don't know
We'll have
are
to
the
go
odds?
see.
What are the odds on it? I mean,
They used to be straight up odds. They used to give you the real odds. Now they've changed them. So I don't know.
if they give you true odds, it could be a better play, but I don't know that they do. Right? Because like the chances of one particular combination,
Right. Exactly.
it's like 1 in 36, right? But they'll usually only pay 35 to 1 or something like that.
You have better luck at the horse races. There are only 12 horses usually.
Oh no, but those are rigged, Christine. The
Of course
trainers and
they
the
are.
jockeys, they know who's ready to run today.
Not
and you
as
don't
not
know.
as much as the harness races. There you have to know who the driver is and how much in debt they are to the mob.
And you want to talk about inside betting, with the Otani scandal, it's fresh in minds. But in horse racing, the guy who's riding the horse is allowed to make a bet on another horse.
Yes,
In the
I
same
know.
race.
That's right.
I mean, there's no restriction on
No.
the people involved betting not on their own horse even.
That's right. And a lot of trainers and owners do exactly that.
I mean, take your money to the track at your own risk, but you're
Yeah,
not
but
playing a fair game out there.
it's still better than the slots.
I see, and my fantasy is to go to that progressive slot that's up to $12 million. 50 cents, I win 12
Well,
million.
if you do play the slot, always play the maximum bet because
That's it.
there's a lot of prizes you can't win if you don't make the maximum bet.
That's
I'll tell you
it.
that too.
I'll keep that in mind. Okay, well,
Fine.
None
anyway,
of this guarantees any success, but it
No,
maximizes your chances.
totally.
Can
I
I,
got
can I
100
just say
bucks.
one thing? I'm not going to be able to make the festivities tonight or the wedding tomorrow because my hips are in very bad shape and mobility is an issue right now. So so enjoy, celebrate,
Yeah.
call Esther's name out as a real smart cookie.
Well, tonight will be on Zoom. Tomorrow, I don't think the wedding is, but you can.
Yeah.
I know,
Okay.
I know.
So yeah, so Chag Purim Sameach. Yeah, I think this. I've gotten a lot of hints about the actors this evening, and I think it's going to be really quite good. People seem to have put a lot more time into it than I would have hoped for.
It's really fun.
So it should be semi-professional, and
Hag Purim to everyone.
Happy Purim.
See you later.
everybody.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye bye.